What up, y'all? One Sir Grove here, checking in with the American people and our allies. How is everyone doing today? This is C4CW, casting 495 celebrities worldwide. I am your host. If you are true fans, then we 495 most certainly appreciate you. If you are not true fans, I can't make you a fan. I just can't do it, man. It's up to you whether you like the show or not. That being said, today's quite interesting. We went from an incredibly cold weekend where the where the Fahrenheit was down to 34 and below, so cold enough to snow, and then it just spiked back up to the 70s. So yeah, it is definitely autumn, fall, with leaves that have turned and are continuing to turn, as well as there is 70 degree weather. So let's get into it. The topic of today, remote viewing, or tonight, this evening, depending on where you are in the parallax view of the multiverse. I was just sharing an anecdote with someone who has a background in government. We were talking about I was in a research study one year, 2005-ish. So what's this? Almost 15 years ago. I was in a study that paid me thousands of dollars, and I lived at a military installation facility for a summer. I had to be there for 13 weeks off and on. The actual, no, I'm sorry, 8 weeks. Was it 8 weeks? It was some weeks that equated to a couple of months of going in and out of the lab, for psychological eval, for, different types of tests and whatnot, until the overnight stay, which then was 13 days. So we weren't allowed to leave the base. We weren't allowed to have any contact with the outside world. I've actually talked about this before. But what I haven't talked about, and they gave me permission, the principal investigators, the PhDs who ran the program, they actually, I requested permission, so they gave me permission to discuss the program, certain aspects of it. So given the location, this was a military medical material command, and what they do are these projects that are co-operated by different agencies. Multiple agencies work on projects at this military facility. So they research, for example, like countermeasures for anthrax, AIDS, HIV, vaccines, and PTSD, ketamine, studies with different types of drugs to mitigate PTSD. They had a malaria study, all these different types of studies to combat different ailments, illnesses, diseases, and weapons of biological weapons of mass destruction. So one of the things that they were also looking into was sleep deprivation, which they call, technically it's not. So the reason I say sleep deprivation, it wasn't sleep deprivation, and that may sound contradictory, but the reason I say that is some people they have heard of sleep deprivation. This wasn't sleep deprivation. This was sleep restriction. So what they did was they had us hooked up to electrodes, brain electrodes and EKGs, and they monitored our brain activity and made sure that we did not go into REM. In other words, we did not sleep. They kept our brains awake for 6 days. We were not allowed to go to sleep. If we went to sleep, it'd be like being in war and you have to stay awake. If you go to sleep, then it's over. So you have to keep your brain on. Well, we had to stay awake for 6 days. I did not even know that was possible. like in my conscious mind, in the foreground of my mind. Maybe somehow I read something somewhere, I heard something, or I knew something from the past. But when it came to this study, I had no idea that a human being could stay awake for 6 days. I thought that it was impossible. I mean, I didn't know how long a person could stay awake. I thought you had like 4 days max or something like that, or 5. I mean, I don't know. I know that there are people who are insomniacs and they've been awake for years. You see, I guess I knew that, but I never really thought about it until now that I talk about it out loud. But at any rate, we had to stay awake for 6 days. And there were times when it looked like we were starting to go into REM, and they would inform us that if we went to sleep, if we closed our eyes, man, and went to sleep, that it was over. And you'd lose thousands of dollars. So the study I was in, I was the only male. The rest of the participants, the human research participants, we were guinea pigs. I was the only male. The rest of the group consisted of females, women. And there were twins. And then there was someone who had been who was active duty in the Army, and she had to get permission to be in the program, even though it's an Army facility. Now, it's Army, it's an Army base, but it's joint agencies. So there are other people there from different agencies. So it shows when you go into the facility through the different layers of security, they have scanners. You're not allowed to use any type of electronic, you cannot have any types of cell phones, smartphones, anything electronic, because there are security operators who sit back and they view a screen, and if they see any type of electromagnetic activity materialize, if they see an arc or a spike on the graph of any type of electromagnetic emanation whatsoever, then they come in with armed guards. And there was actually a participant, I can't go into exact details, somehow, some way, she smuggled a cell phone into the program, and then when she turned it on, they came for her with armed guards. And that's all I'll say about that. I actually had a watch that they allowed for me to bring in because it had the second hand, and it was the old school kind of watch that was non-digital. And they took it apart, scanned it, went through the x-ray machine, and they had me take the battery out and whatnot. They had to analyze the battery to make sure that it wasn't one of those like old school looking watches that would, it would also dual as like, the watches that look vintage, but then you can like flip the top or slide it like a Transformer toy, and it opens up and there's like a calculator in there. There's like a smart device or something like that. So they had, and this was before smartphones, but there are watches back then, 15 years ago, that they looked vintage with the first and second hand, but you'd flip them open and there would be like a digital screen, and you could like, do a calculator or something like this. So they had to make sure that it wasn't one of those types of watches. I don't know how she got the phone in there. Maybe they knew and they just let her do it to see what she was going to do. But they found her. As soon as she turned that phone on in her room to call her boyfriend, they came in with armed guards, man. And they surrounded her. And they actually locked down the entire facility, believe it or not. So, and they did a full sweep multiple times. They even took my watch to make sure that, again, even though they had scanned it, x-rayed it, they had looked at it when I came into the facility, and like a second and third time, they wanted to rule out that it was any of us other than her. So that was weird. That was really interesting. There were two-way mirrors when they did the psychological eval. There were different rooms that were compartmentalized. So what appeared to be one facility and its entirety, there were like other spaces. That was pretty neat that were hidden. But the one aspect that I've never talked about is so in the different labs, right? They have these different, like if you've ever seen any documentaries about CIA and how they mush, that is they pulp paper, anything that's typed or written, they'll mulch it. They turn it into mulch. There is a process whereby the paper, anything that has written or typed information, any type of paper material that has information on it, it is incinerated. It is thrown into a bag and it is burned. And then there's this classified process that takes place where they turn it into mush. Now, there are scientists and engineers who have said, in those rooms where the process takes place, whereby the printed materials are turned into mush, believe it or not, an advanced adversary, like the Russians, the Chinese, even though it is pulped, listen, I've tried to wrap my mind around it for decades. Apparently, information can still be reconstructed. Listen, don't ask me. Don't fucking ask me. But it's kind of like when you wipe a hard drive, right? When you bleach it, as they say, like 23 times over. And one scientist will tell you, okay, you've cleaned your hard drive. It's wiped. It's vaped. It's gone. You bleached it 23 times or more over. You can never recover the data. It's gone. Well, I'm here to inform you that's not necessarily true. Whatever data existed on that device that one time emanated out into the universe or even just existed in a state of zeros and ones on your physical device, a snapshot of that data are still in space-time somewhere and can be retrieved from the spectrum. Just like a lot of people think that they're on a cell phone. Say it's a throwaway phone, right? Like a phone that you can just go and get. Some people, they call it a burner. You make a telephone call. You make one call to whomever it is. You're on the phone for 10 seconds. You take that phone, throw it into the fucking lake. Maybe you run over with the tractor. Maybe you set it on fire with gasoline. Maybe you throw it into the fucking, you shoot it into the sun, right? And it melts and it turns into like crystal, right? Okay, you think that information's gone because the feds were not surveilling you at that time that you made that 10-second call. There may have not been a federal wiretap. The NSA, GCHQ, Government Communications Headquarters, the Russians, the Chinese, any state-level government, any national-level government, any spy agency is not listening to you within those 10 seconds because they're not, quote, on to you yet. Well, I'm here to inform you, any telephone call that you've ever made on this, in the spectrum, on the grid, the feds can go back in space-time and they can find that fucking telephone call. Even if you didn't have a wiretap at that time. They can go back to that data in space-time and they can retrieve that information. Just so you know that. So, yeah, for some things they may not have currently invested resources, but if they want to, they can dial back in time and they can get intel. And that is for real. So, if you're familiar with the movie Deja Vu, it's an awesome movie, and I'm talking about the one with Denzel Washington. I don't want to ruin it. If you haven't seen it, it's one of the best movies ever made in terms of what I just talked about. Don't wiki it. Don't read the premise, the synopsis. Don't read anything about it. Just watch it. Do not, if you see anything pop up on the screen that shows lines of text, just look away. Don't fucking read it. If you can get the movie, man, legally, the movie is called Deja Vu. Like I said, don't read the box, don't read the screen, don't read the text, don't read any fucking words, letters about that movie. Just watch the movie. Okay, so moving forward. Remote viewers. inside this facility, there are these little tiny doors, like a kitchen pantry, like kind of door, right? Not like a full-size door, like a half door. There are these little doors, and they're shielded, and you can't see. There are no windows, so it's not like you can see through them. And at waist level, there are these little horizontal flaps that protrude outward from the door. So these little panels, it's kind of like a little visor. So imagine like I'm looking at my visor in my car, right? So it's like a little visor that intersects with the door midway kind of down, like at your kind of like abdomen level, right? At your like chest, right? There's these little things that come out, these little panels, and you put your hands up under them and then curl your fingers in over, because there's a little dial pad. There's a little digital keyboard on the other, like beneath it, under it. And that's for you to type the code to get into that little lab space. And every one of those lab spaces in these different corridors in this facility, these lab spaces are shielded from electromagnetic intercept. And even within those dark spaces of those corridors, those little visors, those little flaps come down, so that in the event of a remote viewer, say Russian, Chinese, or other, just some random remote viewer who's traveling through hyperspace and seeking information, observing, that is, an observer cannot see what it is that you're typing. You can't see what you're typing either. That's the other thing. Because if you can see it with your eyes, a remote viewer can see it. So you put your fingers up into this little flap and you type the code as you've known it, and the code changes every single day, sometimes several times a day. So I found that to be very interesting. I'm One Sir Grow. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of C4CW, Casting 495, Celebrities Worldwide. Oh yeah, and by the way, try to find something about nanobombs. Nanobombs disappeared from the internet for a very long time, for multiple decades. Because what nanobombs are, is they are the cure to HIV/AIDS. The U.S. military, U.S. government developed nanobombs on another timeline. I know you're going to be like, come on, Grove, here you go again with that like delusional crazy shit that you're talking about, sounding schizophrenic. Well, nanobombs have resurfaced, because when I first learned that the U.S. military cured AIDS, HIV decades ago, the information disappeared in the Mandela effect. It's disappeared from reality. It was gone. And I tried to find traces of the information for many years, like 30 years after the fact. Internet was sanitized. It was non-existent. The information that I read in the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, gone, vaporized, Mandela affected. Well, now you're starting to hear again about nanobombs. They're not telling you exactly how they're used, or what the full scope of what they can be used for. Some of the information is there, but the original article and the information regarding how nanobombs were used to cure HIV 100% of the time in military experiments that actually took place in Seattle, Washington, at an area that's known as East Lake, at a DoD military facility on a timeline that seems to have been removed from this current timeline. The U.S. military actually cured HIV/AIDS using nanobombs that are millions of times smaller than human hairs. And they can target certain cells and certain matter as opposed to the surrounding cells and matter. So you can, similar to proton therapy, you can target HIV and you can destroy it 100% of the time using nanobombs. And the U.S. military did it successfully hundreds of times in laboratory experiments, and it worked perfectly. And at some point, they were hoping to aerosolize it. They wanted to aerosolize it, turn it into a mist, so that someone who was exposed to HIV, they could basically take a little spray, little spritz, and they could just spritz themselves, and that aerosolized mist would deactivate HIV/AIDS. And they were actually working on doing that after they found a cure to HIV in successful, hundreds of times over, U.S. military, U.S. defense, science, U.S. intelligence community experiments that worked flawlessly. So if you didn't know, nanobombs are actually the cure to HIV/AIDS. I'm One Sir Grove.